Hi, Su-Yen. How are
Hi,
you?
Manbir.
Good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining in. I know you have a busy schedule. Thank you so much for joining me for my
As
show,
do you.
Suzanne.
As do you.
Cool. So let me formally introduce you to my audience today in this show called Growth Mindset Conversations. Su-Yen Wong is joining us from Singapore. She serves as a director of several public, private, and not-for-profit organizations headquartered in Asia, Australia, and the United States. She's a board and C-suite advisor, keynote speaker on the future of work, and professor of global leadership. Su-Yen is passionate about helping audience around the world navigate the intersection of technology, strategy, and leadership. Her company, Bronze Phoenix, is a premier provider of solutions that help organizations and leaders reinvent themselves. She graduated with an MBA from the University of North Carolina. A best selling author, Su-Yen is currently training for Everest Base Camp in support of mental health. Oh my God, that's a lot of good work, Su-Yen.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm not bored, put it that way.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on my show. It's my honor to have you. And it's
It's
so
it's
interesting.
my pleasure.
So, Ian, to start with, as you know, that the show's name is Growth Mindset
Mhm.
Conversations, I would start with what is growth mindset for Suyin?
For me, it's really about being curious. Growth mindset is being curious about the world around us. It's being curious about people. It's being curious about places. It's being curious about experiences. So that to me is what the growth mindset is about.
Wow, it's about curiosity. And when I use the curiosity, I always say that genuine curiosity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So it's about being curious about your own self, about people around you, about things around you, about the world
Mm.
around you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I know you spoke about reinventing your own self. And how does this curiosity, growth mindset relate to reinventing your own self?
Mm. So I think when you think about reinvention, it's about sort of moving into a new field, a new domain. It's about turning the page of a book into the next chapter. And so
Mm-hmm.
very often when that happens, you don't actually know what that is, right? Like when you're reading a novel, you don't know exactly once you turn the page what how the plot's going to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're reinventing ourselves, it's very similar. It's about having sort of a very open mind and being able to say, okay, well, let me experiment a little bit. Let me free myself of any constraints that I may put against myself, or that society may put against me,
Yeah.
or that my friends or my family may put against me, and really sort of explore. Let me think about what I'm going to learn. Let me think about the kind of networks that I'm going to build. And let me think about basically being curious, back to that
Yeah.
point, about
Yeah.
what those pathways might look like. And that then allows us to actually step into areas that might not we might not have considered before. I think one of the things that I come across a lot when I work with leaders is, by the time you get to a certain level in an organization, you're there because you're good at what you do. It's because you put in the 10,000 hours and you're really, really good at what you do. But that also means that you've probably had to give up some time to explore other things because you've been very focused on the things that you're working on,
Yeah.
whether it's a
Yeah.
particular role, particular company. So this actually reinvention gives us permission to expand those boundaries a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I loved you what you said. You know, it's a page turning kind of a thing, coming to a new page of a novel of your life,
That's
and
right.
being curious. And there's a term called beginner's mindset, right? Having that beginner's mindset, curiosity there, that what's going to be there in that particular circumstances. So then, it looks good, when we say about it, when we
Yeah.
talk about it,
Mhm.
but in practical life, leaders, they actually don't do it. They are like, so busy with their I mean, many of my clients, I work with a lot of executive teams. They're so busy with their day-to-day routines, the way organization is working, the way culture is driven. It's all
Mhm.
kind of in auto mode. what are the triggers or kind of red alert areas or red alert points when leaders think, or yes, now it's time to reinvent, or now we should reinvent organization or ourselves? What are those pointers or those signs basically?
Yeah. So there's a lot in there, actually. So let me sort of address the first portion of your comments, which is that, some leaders very often know this is something they need to do, but they
Mm-hmm.
don't do it. So why is that? One, as you said, is like you said, in organizations, people get very busy.
Yeah.
Um, and you get very focused on things that you're doing. So you don't have enough time to sort of, have that free sort of space. But the second reason actually is that very often, I mean, we're human beings. We always feel that sometimes, and I see this in a lot of the leaders I work with, it's somebody else's job to change. So let's say the organization is going through an organization transformation, for example. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm in sales, oh, it's the engineering people who aren't doing what they're doing. If I'm
Yeah.
in marketing, oh my goodness, it's because HR is not doing their job, or and
Yeah.
so on. Or if I'm in a senior leader, it's because my team isn't getting it right. So there are loads and loads of ways where we actually deflect the responsibility for reinvention and for looking at growth to others. So I would say the first step is really, to your question, having time to reflect and having the openness to consider that actually I have a role to play in this. And as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
I actually need to lead this by example, by
Mm-hmm.
driving that change within myself first. And if
Mm-hmm.
we can drive that change within ourselves, then it actually permeates through the rest of the organization, who
Yeah.
then take their cue from others that they see around them.
Yeah. 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 Having the time to reflect and being accountable.
Absolutely.
That, yeah, I love what you said. So it starts from us,
Yes.
wherever you are. It could be
Yes.
a mid level, senior level, board member, wherever you are. It
Yeah.
starts from you,
Yeah.
right?
So
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, having a time to reflect is something which is a starting point. So what else stop people from reinventing themselves?
I guess I've seen a few different parameters. One really has to do with we get comfortable.
Hmm.
We get very comfortable in familiar spaces.
Hmm.
And so, to give you an example, if somebody is saying, well, I'm looking for a promotion, I'm looking for a new role,
Yeah.
do we stick in the area that we're focused on and familiar with? Or
Mm-hmm.
do we say, actually, I'm going to try something different? It might be a lateral move. It might be
Yeah.
move into a different industry. It might be move in some manner that's not familiar. Now, they're usually trade-offs. There very
Yes.
often are trade-offs, right? Because we are very accustomed to a career model that is a ladder. So I'm going to move up the ladder and I'm going to sort of continue in the space that I'm familiar with. Well,
Yeah.
that works for a while. But then what you realize is that you actually need to build out beyond that ladder if you're actually going to explore the growth mindset. And I think it's really around a question of time horizon. If you look at a career, for example, with a relatively short time horizon, indeed, you need to build the expertise, you need to build the depth in a particular area. But over the long haul, if you take a long view of it, actually what's important is the ability to connect the dots. And
Mm-hmm.
you can only connect the dots if you have enough experiences in a lot of different parallel universes to be able to see how the bigger picture connects. The
Yeah.
analogy that I like to use is if you're, a very focused in a particular area, you might know that particular corner of the picture really, really well, but you
Mm-hmm.
might not see the rest of the picture. So that involves getting out and trying some new things, moving into a new
Hmm.
function, a new department, a new industry. And equally for companies. So if there's anybody who's watching today who's in a leadership role in a company where you think about how to move people around, well, we're equally guilty because very often in an organization, you're trying to fill a role of people who have done exactly that job before. So we're
Exactly.
sometimes not willing to take the risks of actually putting somebody in who might not have that same level of technical expertise, but
Yeah.
actually has the ability to learn and to grow in that role. In the longer term, for the organization, that is also the right thing to do, because then you have
Yeah.
people who can think from an organization perspective. And
Yeah.
again, they can connect the dots for the organization. So this works at two different levels, both the organization as well as the individual level.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really like that point because when I work with executives for leadership pipeline, I always say horizontal growth is very, very important. It's not about only vertical growth. So
Yes.
people who have moved around have those, experience of
Yeah.
horizontal roles, maybe different industries, maybe different
Yep.
verticals, business units are the best people for senior leadership roles. So, and the other point you brought is bigger picture connect. So, we talk a lot about bigger picture connect. It is one thing to talk about bigger picture connect from your role, but it's
Mhm.
actually something else to experience the bigger picture connection,
Yes.
as you said, connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Mm.
think the other dimension we sort of to highlight here is also difference in operating environments. So that
Yes.
might be geography, but it might
Mm-hmm.
also be different kinds of cultures. So even
Mm.
within one particular organization, you may have different subcultures.
Absolutely.
So, I think one of the things
Mm.
that when you have a growth mindset, you sort of suspend your assumptions.
Mm.
You don't assume that what you are used to, or that what I'm
Mm.
used to, is what this new environment is bringing to the table. And so that really allows us to then sort of get the best of both worlds. I have
Mm.
my experience, but I'm also going to add on to that a new reality that I might not be
Yeah.
familiar with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you said, suspending assumptions. I think sometimes that doesn't happen on their own. Basically, you need to go and ask for help. Maybe you need to work with a coach or a mentor or a industry colleague because somebody else has to see you from different perspective and help you shed those assumptions.
Yes, I completely agree. Again, we get very accustomed to the circles that we run in.
Yeah.
We're not really talking about social circles, although that also applies. But even in the professional context, if you're only looking at it within your very sort of narrow domain, we all have blind
Mm,
spots, right? So it doesn't
absolutely.
matter what level we're at, whether we're a junior person or we're a senior person, having honest feedback, people
Mm,
who will actually tell you what it looks like from the outside is so
yeah.
important. And that gets harder the more senior you go, because
Mm,
everybody around you just wants to tell you that you're right, all the time.
yes.
Depending on the culture that you're in, of course. So
Yeah.
if you're in a more egalitarian culture, you might get a little bit more, you might get a bit more feedback than if you're in a very status or hierarchical oriented culture. But nevertheless, the same is generally true, which is that the higher you go, the harder it becomes to actually
Yeah.
get that honest input. So yes,
Yeah.
I think it's so important to have
Yeah.
that network and support infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I'm also curious as we are talking about, people shedding those assumptions and those cultures.
Mhm.
What are the key characteristics of an organization that promotes reinvention of your career, of your being?
Well, so here's the paradox. I think a lot of organizations, at least most of the ones that I work with, are going
Mm-hmm.
through some form of transformation of their own,
Yeah.
right? So they recognize that the organization needs to shift because technology is shifting, business models are shifting, the world is shifting at large. So at an organization level, we recognize this. But within the organization, when it gets to the people level, it becomes very difficult sometimes to translate that into policies. Let me give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about training and
Mm.
investment in training.
Yeah.
Very often, the approach that companies take is they're going to invest in training for people to do the job that they have today.
Right.
And a very common philosophy is, well, if it's not related to your job today, why should we fund that? Why should we invest in that? Because it's not related to your job that you're doing. So that is actually a fundamental disconnect, because what you're really trying to do is you're trying to create people and develop people who are ready for the job for tomorrow, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's actually a shift that needs to happen in terms of how
Mm.
we think about development and how we actually move people into the roles, not just to perform for today, but to perform for tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that will ultimately help the organization achieve its objectives as it is also transforming to meet the needs of its customers and
Yeah,
markets.
yeah, absolutely. It's not for today, also for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I also would like to add something here that gone are those days when only organization need to think about it. So
Yeah.
I think it's both ways. Everybody, all people, everybody in the organizations at whatever level need to think about it, need to take accountability of this culture and co-create that culture with the organization,
And
right?
that's such a great point, Manbir. I mean, and that is exactly the reason why I'm actually launching the Reinventors Roadmap Summit, is
Yeah.
actually to provide role models of people who have successfully reinvented themselves. Because regardless of what stage that you're at, it can be a
Mm-hmm.
little scary. It can be a little
Mm.
bit scary to think about, oh my goodness, I spent 20 years in accounting. I've spent 20 years or 15 years in consumer goods, or I've spent an entire career in banking. Now you're telling me that I need to reinvent myself to remain relevant. Oh, that's really hard. But when you look at how people have gone about this and you looked at the
Mm.
success that they've had on the back end, it's tough as you go through the process, but it can be done, right? And so
Yeah.
one of the things that I think is really important is to actually take cues, to your point earlier, take cues from others who have walked down that path before.
Yeah.
Yes, we all need to walk our own path, but there's no harm at all in learning from others who have done that before.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And as we are talking about, people in the organizations, so what are the key qualities these people should have to reinvent themselves for their own success?
Yes. So when you look at reinvention, one of the things that comes through very clearly amongst all the reinventors that I've interviewed over time, a couple of dimensions. The first is you actually have to put a lot of work into it.
Yes.
There's no shortcut. And when I say work, it means that, you've got your day job, you're working on your core role, but if you're
Yeah.
also trying to reinvent into new space, you're probably learning new skills at the same time. Right? To
Mm-hmm.
get good at anything takes time. It takes the practice of that craft. It takes developing an awareness and understanding of the industry, the market, the job, the people that are involved in that space. So the first point I would say is that it actually takes a lot of energy to be able to think about and commitment and passion in that new space that really focusing on. The second thing I would say is also to, as we talked about a little bit earlier, to have mentors along the way. So to
Yeah.
have people who can serve as a guide, to be able to share their experiences. You might not map it one on one. And indeed, it's very difficult to find an exact map because we're all different. Where we're starting from and where we're
Mm-hmm.
heading to is very different. But mentors are important. Think about it even as a personal board of directors. So, who are the people that can give you the unfiltered feedback as you go along your reinvention path? And then the
Yeah.
final thing I would say is, when you think about reinvention, it's really also about looking at, how do I want to spend my time? Because it is such hard work. Uh,
Absolutely.
you want to pick an area that you're genuinely curious about, that you're genuinely passionate about, so that you can actually invest that time, emotional energy into that process. And
Mm-hmm.
I think in that, and once you get through the hump, then everything does get better. But there is a
Yeah.
hump that you have to go through. So I don't want to make it sound like reinvention is, oh, this, bed of roses and it's,
Yeah.
easy and
Yeah.
you see
No,
the
no,
glory at
no.
the end. There's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of work, commitment, and of course,
Yeah.
along the way, you need other people to support you. So,
Yes.
having said this, still, I guess, ROI of your investment may not be immediate. I think that's another thing, people should keep in mind that it's going gestation period could be long, and there could be
Yes.
turns and curves around the path.
So true. So true. I think when you look at reinvention, again, I would say you need to have a long haul mindset. In the
Mm-hmm.
short term, like learning any new skill, you don't actually see much difference. You ever watch a kid trying to learn how to play a musical instrument? In the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds terrible. Honestly, it sounds terrible, right? Because they're trying to learn, and they can't really figure it out. And day by day, you don't actually see much difference. It still
Yeah.
sounds terrible on the second day. The third day, it still sounds terrible. The second week, it still sounds terrible. The second month, it still sounds terrible. But
Yeah.
then you keep going. And then after a while, hey, hang on, the kid's playing a tune. Hey, hang on, after 5 years, they're actually playing a very impressive piece. And then after 10 years, they get really good at it. So measure it not in days and minutes, but in weeks, months, and years.
Yeah. 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 Wonderful. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Wonderful. So as we are going towards the end of the show, Suzanne, I'm very keen to ask you your experience and about Everest Base Camp and how do you relate this to reinvention?
Oh, there are so many parallels. Let me just share a few experiences with you. So I don't actually particularly like mountains because
Hmm.
I actually think I have this worry. It's a very irrational worry that I'm going to fall off the edge of a cliff.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, my husband came back one day, back in actually a couple of years ago, and he said, "Well, how about Everest Base Camp to raise funds and to raise awareness for mental health and resilience?" And that's a cause that I'm actually personally passionate about. And this was pre-pandemic, right? But of course, now with the pandemic, that's really brought it even closer into focus.
Yeah, yeah,
But here's the thing: we weren't particularly fit individuals. At least I wasn't. And so one of the things that I said to myself, okay, if you're going to sort of make it up to Everest Base Camp in one piece, come back alive, you probably need to start doing something about it to sort of get your fitness level in gear. And so, like reinvention, um,
hmm,
we started training on a training regimen by climbing stairs. You start the first weekend, we tried climbing stairs. We tried basically 28 stories. We died. Went home, was completely useless the rest of the day. I was aching for the rest of the week. But you keep at it. You keep at it. And so every week we would notch it up a little bit, notch it up a little bit, notch it up a little bit.
yeah.
We eventually added on to that running. I'm not a runner. My first run that I was doing, which was um, 1.5 kilometers. It took me almost 20 minutes. I was so slow. It was really terrible. But again, fast forward, consistency, kept up with the schedule, rain or shine. And you know what? In a matter of 16 months, I think it was, I was able to do a half marathon. So
Wow.
reinvention is the same way. You start with baby steps. You start,
Hmm.
and it's difficult and it's a lot of discipline, just sticking with it, and you keep at it and you keep at it. And over time, those small steps translate into significant wins. So when you think about Everest Base Camp and when I reflect on my journey preparing for it, it's exactly the same path as a reinvention path. And through
Wow.
that process, if you can look at health metrics and things like that, from a personal transformation perspective, that certainly had an impact on my well-being, my fitness, and my health levels. So yes, I think reinvention is similarly the same. You just have to start with small steps and then stay with it for the long haul. Be patient, put in the hard work.
Hmm.
It's worth it.
Wow. Wow. It's worth it. Wow. Awesome. I'm so glad you shared this journey. It's so inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Manbir. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It was my pleasure to have you here and listen to your experience and point of view. It has added a lot of value to me, believe me, a lot of value. It inspired me. And I'm really sure it has added a lot of value to the audience of this show.
Thank you so much once again. I'm so delighted to join you for this. Thank you, Manbir.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching this video. See you all again in the next video in this series. And do subscribe to this channel to watch more videos here to help you succeed in your own journey. Thank you and all the very best.